Welcome to Waterside Chat. Tom Sadler talks with guests who depend on healthy oceans and fisheries for their recreation and livelihoods. And now, let's get started.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's Waterside Chat. I am Tom Sadler, the network's deputy director and the host for the Waterside Chat. I am delighted to welcome Kate Masury to the chat. Kate is the executive director of Eating with the Ecosystem, and I had the pleasure of meeting Kate 5 years ago, and we talked about the work that Eating with the Ecosystem does and her terrific cookbook, recipe book that we'll talk a little bit about. And so let me welcome Kate to the show, and let's get started. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks, Tom.
So let's get started with who's Kate Masury?
Sure. So I am the executive director of Eating with the Ecosystem, and I grew up in southern Maine, but now live in Rhode Island with my dog, and I'm a big seafood fan, and yeah, that's the gist of it.
Were you born and raised in Rhode Island?
No, I grew up in southern Maine, in Kittery, and then went to undergrad at Holy Cross in Worcester, Mass, and then grad school in California at Scripps Institute of Oceanography.
So how did you
then
wind
ended
up?
up in Rhode Island after that.
Say again, and then
Ended up in Rhode Island after that.
and what brought you to Rhode Island?
The job with Eating with the Ecosystem, actually.
Really?
So I had been in California for 4 years. At that point, I had worked out there prior to going to grad school. And I wanted to return back to New England, and was interested in working in the sustainable seafood space, and ended up finding this job with Eating with the Ecosystem that was a good fit for me, and moved to Rhode Island.
Awesome. Well, let's touch real quickly on eating like a fish, simmering the sea. What led you to that?
So that was part of a research project that we had with the University of Rhode Island, where we were working with Jeremy Colley, who's a fisheries scientist there, and one of his graduate students, Joe Zatoli. Then we were also working with an economist there, Hiro Uchida, and part of the project was calculating the ecological production of our Northeast marine ecosystems, and comparing that with what our fisheries were landing and then what was actually available in the marketplace. And so we ran the citizen science portion of the project looking at the local seafood availability in the New England marketplace portion. And that was the Eat Like a Fish project, where we had citizen scientists from all around New England helping to collect that data and sending us information about the fish that they were eating every week. But we also created a cookbook as part of that project, and that was Simmering the Sea, which produced recipes for a wide diversity of local seafood species, but particularly the species that you don't see in your average cookbook. I think most people can find a recipe for scallops or cod, but it's a little harder to find a recipe for sea robin. So we wanted to feature kind of some of the species that are local and abundant in our New England waters, but were not quite as prevalent in cookbooks. So we worked with a chef from Johnson and Wales University to help actually develop the recipes for the cookbook. And then the cookbook, it serves as both obviously a cookbook with delicious recipes, but also shares ecological information about each of the species. And so it's got information about kind of the different roles in the ecosystem that they play and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean it's been interesting when I've flipped through the book periodically as not as much as a cookbook, but as a reference book to the sustainability of these non spotlight fishes, right?
Mhm.
We've over the years we've had the opportunity to talk with people about using underutilized or on fish, and so it's a great opportunity or a great resource for finding out why it's important, and then how do you actually cook with these
Right.
fish, and they're terrific. So, well, let's talk a little bit about eating with the ecosystem. That's why I got you on here. Um, tell me, or tell our listeners and viewers, sort of take us through the standard mission, vision, purpose of eating with the ecosystem, because it's not as what you normally would expect when you read something like that. So why don't you take us through that if you don't mind?
Yeah, so we're a really small organization. We were founded in 2014 by a group of fishermen, scientists, and chefs. And actually, we became a nonprofit in 2014. We were founded in 2012, actually as a dinner series is how we started out. And the group of fishermen, scientists, and chefs were hosting these eating with the ecosystem dinners that helped tell a story about the local ecosystems and marine ecosystems, and featured seafood that came out of them, gave opportunities for researchers to share kind of their research that was going on related to the species. Chefs were able to share they'd create these delicious menus kind of that helped illustrate that story with these different underutilized seafood species. And then fishermen would be at the dinners, and they could share kind of their perspectives and then what they were seeing on the water. And so those dinners became pretty popular, and it then grew from there and became a nonprofit, as I said, in 2014. And the mission is to promote what we call a place-based approach to sustaining New England's wild seafood. So for us, it's all about taking care of our marine ecosystems and supporting our local fishing communities by eating a wide diversity of local seafood species, kind of in proportion to their natural abundances.
So not many nonprofits start as a food gathering, right?
No, I don't think so.
No, and have you seen that model grow a little bit in other parts of the country?
I think I've definitely seen similar events. Like we continue to host events. We have a annual community seafood dinner coming up on November 9th, and we've done a number of different restaurant dinners and cooking classes and different things like that. But I've definitely seen events that feature kind of different local and underutilized species popping up all around the country. So I think that's something, and opportunities where fishermen are kind of part of the dinner and able to share their stories is definitely something that I see. We're part of the local catch network, which is nationwide nonprofit organization that consists of primarily direct seafood sales businesses, although it has researchers and nonprofits and all kinds of other members within it. But values-based seafood where they share kind of these types of opportunities as well. And so I've seen those type of dinners popping up, around the country, both within that network, but also within other groups.
I may be shining a glaring spotlight on the obvious, but it seems to me that if you wanted to connect with people who don't necessarily follow sustainability and marine ecosystem challenges, et cetera, that this would be a pretty effective way to do it.
Yeah, bribing people with delicious seafood is
Yeah,
is
no.
a good way to get them to the table. I think, one of
Well,
the ways that we like to engage with people is to feed them and to introduce them to different species. I can, talk about different local fish or shellfish, anytime and say, okay, it's sweet, or it has this great meaty texture, or like things like that. But nothing sells it better than giving people the opportunity to actually try it and experience it for themselves. And I think also giving them the opportunity to connect then with the harvester, the person that actually, helped get that seafood to your plate, is something kind of important and unique. A lot of times we're really disconnected with where our seafood comes from in this country. And so I think having people have that opportunity to connect directly with the harvester or the seafood business even that helped get it there and understand a little bit more about the challenges that they face, is something that's really important.
Yeah, to me, I mean, if you want to bring people to the table, you should actually feed them. And what you're doing seems to me to be almost a no-brainer to get people to understand that connection between what they're putting on the table and where it comes from. And this is National Seafood Month, and um, no better time to highlight that connection from the water, the resource, to the table. And the work that you're doing is terrific.
Thank you.
Um, it's so you also the eating with the ecosystem has a set of principles that sort of is foundational to the work you're doing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we have what we refer to as our 5 anchors, which are really our principles of a place-based approach to seafood sustainability. And so while we're a local New England-focused organization, I think these principles can really be applied anywhere. And so the first one is proximity. We want people to choose seafood from their local ecosystem. I think that there's a lot of benefits to this. I think this is something that people are generally fairly familiar with in terms of other local foods. And so your food's traveling less far before it reaches your plate. You're forming a connection with and supporting the local community that actually helped harvest that seafood, whether it's the fishermen themselves or the seafood supply chain businesses that helped get it to your plate. You're supporting them when you're eating local. And then you're also forming a connection with the place that actually produced your seafood, that marine ecosystem. And I think that gives you a greater incentive to actually care about that place and want to support it and take care of it and have healthy marine ecosystems. So whether you live on the coast or not, you're kind of connecting directly with our oceans when you're eating local seafood. And so I think that's really important as well. Our second anchor is symmetry. Instead of just eating 1 or 2 local species, we really think that it's important that we diversify our diets and eat kind of a wide variety of species that come out of our local waters, but in proportion to their natural abundances. So here in New England, there's over 100 different edible species that are harvested that we could be eating, and yet we often eat very few of them. And so we try to do a lot of education and awareness and promotion for those species that are less well known and less recognized kind of on menus or in seafood markets. And then our third anchor is adaptability. Our ecosystems are constantly changing, and what's in the ecosystems are also constantly changing. So we think it's really important that we adapt our diets with those ecosystem changes as they're happening. So that could be seasonal changes, or it could be longer term changes like climate related impacts, for example, and basically adapting our diets to those different changes that are happening in the ecosystem. And then there's our fourth anchor is our connectivity anchor. We think being a sustainable consumer goes beyond just the choices kind of that you're making at the seafood counter. It's really about taking care of the habitats that produce our seafood as well. And we on land have a lot of role in that. And so whether it's using kind of more biodegradable, earth-friendly products in your homes, to not putting chemical fertilizers or pesticides on your lawns, to voting for policies that help support healthy habitats, or actually taking part in habitat restoration projects. I think all of that involves being a sustainable seafood consumer. And then our fifth anchor is our community anchor. And so we think that eating local seafood is something that you can do to really help support your local community, whether it's your local fisherman or the local seafood market or restaurant down the street. We think local seafood is something we can come together around as a community and celebrate. There's a lot of cultural significance to seafood all over the world. And so I think highlighting that and celebrating that is something that's really important as well.
Awesome. So Kate, we have a question.
Oh, sure.
I'll take a break here to let me see if I'm smart enough to pull it up. So Johanna asks, are there efforts in the K through 12 schools to educate the next generation not only about their future food supply and marine environment, but also they bring home experiences and can promote otherwise hesitant or uninformed guardians or family members and providers?
Yeah, the K through 12 school space is an audience that we've definitely recognized at Eating with the Ecosystem that we're really excited to kind of engage with more. But it also, we're a really small organization and it requires a lot of times more manpower sometimes than we fully have. And so there are a lot of efforts happening in organizations that we partner with in different places, but we also have a few projects that we're involved in. For example, we're working with the Commercial Fisheries Center of Rhode Island and Farm Fresh Rhode Island on getting more local seafood into K through 12 schools in the state. And so there's a seafood business here called Tony's Seafood that's developed this really cool monkfish slider. And so we've been working on piloting that in a couple different elementary schools and middle schools within the state and testing it with students and are working on getting it into more schools. And along with that, providing some education about the monkfish and about the fishing communities and different things like that as part of it. But I think that the K through 12 school space is definitely an area where there's a lot more opportunity to engage with students. And we've been trying to provide just more resources and information for schools in general. We do a lot of college class presentations, but we've done a few with more high school age students and are also we try to make a lot of our events, some of them are more adult focused events, but we definitely try to make some of them kind of family friendly. And so like our community dinner, for example, coming up on November 9th is open to, people of all ages, including, small children. We hope that, seafood's something I think anyone can partake in. And it's something that's really good for growing minds. So would love to see more kids eating local seafood.
So, and Johanna references this. There's, she used a good word. She said, in our household, the adults seem super uninclined to shift tastes. And I think that's been, I guess, even for myself, it's, I'm not as, when I was younger, I wasn't as adventurous in my eating. How have you guys, or have you had the opportunity to try to, I don't know if it's breaking that barrier, but get folks to understand that monkfish is at least when I was growing up, we were called it poor man's lobster. But you think about New England, you think about lobster, maybe you think about cod, but how do you sea robin? How do you get people when we were kids, mussels were something you used to catch crabs with and not, now it's, a high-end menu item. So how do you shift that focus? How do you get folks to try something new?
I find that, young people are really eager and excited to do things, they care about the ecosystem. I feel like, especially even like young kids that from, preschool and up, kind of they're introduced to sustainability as a concept and they're learning about recycling or composting or, have school gardens now and things like that. And so I think like that the younger generations are definitely more receptive in general to just like I think these concepts. But I also find that like some of our biggest groups of followers tend to be, young professionals or, college or graduate level kind of students who are really interested and willing to try new foods and different local seafood species, are very excited about the idea of kind of trying some of these underutilized or underserved species. And so just giving them the opportunity to actually try them is half the battle, because a lot of times they're hard to find kind of at some of our markets or are on all menus or things like that. It's a lot easier to find kind of the more popular species. So I think we'll do work with college students a fair amount. And I find that like those students are really interested and really eager to take part in this type of stuff. But yeah, helping giving them the opportunities to actually try the species or information about what species are local to them and stuff like that is kind of more what they need. In terms of like how you actually like engage with people, I don't know. I think trying new species is fun. And
Right,
so
right, for sure.
I think getting it to try new foods, whether it's seafood or something else, it can be really fun and exciting. And so playing up the fun aspects of it, and like sometimes I think, especially I don't know, it can be easy to get bogged down in all the information in terms of like seafood sustainability and that kind of thing. But for us, one of the biggest things that you can do in terms of seafood sustainability is really diversify your diet and eat a wide variety of different local seafood species. And so that means trying different things. And so I think keeping things fairly simple, at least to start with, and giving them opportunities to be introduced without being overwhelmed by the information, I think is important. And then continuing to engage with them or whatever. So like maybe they tried skate wing or something like that at one of our events, and they're like, okay, I liked that. Like I'm ready to like, cook that at home. Where can I get a recipe? And then providing them kind of with, okay, here's the recipe for skate wing for this, something you could prepare at home. And if you like that, you could also use that similar recipe in it, like, with this other fish and stuff like that. And trying to, step by step without overwhelming people, I think is something that is important, because it can be really easy to get bogged down with all the information that's out there in terms of seafood and sustainability. But I think step by step, just diversifying your diets, trying different local seafood species, taking the opportunities when you see them at different fish markets to be like, okay, I've never had that before, ask about it at the counter and bring it home, kind of is something that most people can do.
So I think I think you made a very important point, is that it's not just try it once, but how do you keep, like you said, somebody tries skate wing and they say, "Oh, I really like this. How do I get it?" Um, um, what I think is was interesting in all that was the notion that eating with the ecosystem creates a resource. I mean, the book, the Simmering the Sea was a resource for me. It's I think that's extremely useful service that you provide. If I'm sort of struggling with the question I want here, is that um, do you reach out to, so I guess where I was going was there's restaurants, right? How do we or how do you approach the restaurants to say, look, here's some things that you could offer that would dovetail into what we're trying to promote?
Yeah, I think we really love working with restaurants. I think a lot of people, where they're willing to be more adventurous or try
Hmm.
different seafood species, is in the restaurants, because they have a professional chef who's going to prepare something delicious for them. And so they're not relying on their own cooking skills, if maybe that's something that they're a little concerned about. So yeah, we
Right.
love working with different chefs and stuff. I think for the chefs, a lot of times, the question that we get most frequently is like, what species should we be serving? And so we talk to them about like kind of the wide diversity of species that we do have in our local waters and seasonally what that looks like, because it does change throughout the season kind of. And then where can they source it? And so we try to connect them. We've got some great seafood suppliers in our region, whether it's direct from the fishermen in some cases or from the seafood distributors, wholesalers. Kind of connecting them with places that they can actually source some of these species. Because a lot of times they're like, oh, okay, like scup, for example, or porgy is a local species that's really abundant here in New England, and it's super versatile. Like you can serve it a lot of different ways on menus. And the chefs are all very talented and capable of preparing any of these species kind of. But kind of comparing it maybe with species that they're familiar with. So scup is kind of similar. It's very similar to a European sea bream. So some chefs might be more familiar with that. And so you can kind of compare it to that and say you can prepare it similar ways and then connect them with a seafood distributor that can then actually get it to their restaurant for them, is something that I find that most chefs kind of find helpful and appreciate.
So, and you can bring those resources, that information to bear for a restaurant, for a chef.
Yeah,
if
a
they
lot of
want.
times we'll meet with the restaurant or have a phone call or something like that with them. I try to engage with them on kind of like a one-on-one level to understand what their needs are kind of
Mhm.
within their restaurant. Every restaurant is different. And so we try to have kind of a open conversation with them to learn about kind of what they're looking for, and then provide them with that information. So whether it's just learning about the different species that we have that they might want to incorporate into their menus, or helping them source different species, or if they want to be able to share some information with their staff, for example, like doing some kind of training or something like that with their staff to then be able to communicate that information to their customers.
And you provide that resource to them
We can, yeah.
for sure. Which, as you were talking about what chefs asking what they should be serving, Roger had the question about what are you doing to discourage eating endangered species?
So we definitely don't promote eating endangered species.
Yep.
So, and so I think one of the ways that, we, I guess, avoid promoting an endangered species is definitely focusing on promoting the local and particularly the really abundant or kind of underserved species. The
Underserved, no pun intended.
Yeah, underserved, no pun intended. The species that are really abundant in our ecosystems, but really don't have a ton of like market value or whatever. So they tend to be kind of some of the less expensive species, which makes them more accessible, but also makes it at least in a price point standpoint.
Sure. No, I get it.
But we definitely tend to promote those kind of really abundant species, but also I think related to not promoting endangered species. The US has some of the strongest and strictest fisheries regulations worldwide. It's a really highly regulated industry, and endangered species are obviously on the endangered species list here in the United
Right.
States, and there's all these laws and enforcement in place that if someone was to harvest an endangered species, or that you can't sell those endangered species or whatever. So it would if people were trying to eat endangered species here, that would be, first of all, illegal, and there would be
Right.
consequences. But if you're eating local, like New England or local US caught seafood, it's facing these regulations that would prevent endangered species from being sold or served.
Sure. Yeah, and I think there's
And
also
that's not the same necessarily worldwide. I think that's like seafood is very much a global commodity. And so you can get, seafood shipped to you from all over the world. And so not all, as a fairly wealthy country. We have a lot more resources that goes into enforcement and protection and the science and all of the regulations and all of that. And that's not necessarily the case in some other countries or whatever. So I would say like definitely focusing on US seafood and specifically the local seafood industry, kind of where you can connect directly with the businesses that are selling your seafood and know where it's coming from is something that we promote a lot. And so if you know where your seafood is coming from, then you can trust that they're harvesting it in ways that that are more environmentally friendly and not harming kind of the ecosystem and the other species within that.
Well, I think that's a very good point, Kate, and it speaks to a larger issue of, the imported seafood coming from countries that don't have the regulation regimes that we have here, that the work that you're doing promoting the local sustainable seafood resource, and then the infrastructure that supports that resource is probably, at least for the US, the best opportunity we have to keep those fish that are either endangered or threatened to be endangered off the menus, right? And now,
Right.
and again, it's all kind of connected to that. Well, if I'm used to eating X, what's my opportunity to eat Y now? And I think that's the work that you're doing is terrific in that respect. Let me shift. One of the things when I was looking at the website, excuse me for a sec. When I was looking at the website, I noticed that you had the roadmap for climate resilient seafood supply chains. And obviously, the 8,000 pound gorilla in the room for policymakers and humans is global climate change. Regardless of how it's being created, it's creating some challenges. And so walk me through the roadmap, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I think there, obviously, as you pointed out, climate change is a topic that a lot of a lot of people are interested in. And within the seafood industry, there's been a fair amount of research because it's definitely impacting fisheries in a big way. You're seeing shifting of species, for example, into other regions, or you're seeing, changes in abundance. You're, all kinds of different impacts. And so there's been a fair amount of research done looking at how climate change might impact like fishermen or like kind of like basically and like how it might impact the ecosystems and then hence the fisheries themselves, that kind of thing. But there had been less work done focused on once the fish hits the dock, how might that impact the seafood supply chains? And as we know from talking to fishermen and members of the seafood industry, a lot of times, whether or not they are successful and doing well, very much depends on the market. And so fishermen are pretty adaptive by nature. They're good at being creative and figuring and learning and figuring out how to catch different species. So, for example, if other species shifted northward and were in our waters, I trust that the fishermen, if they were allowed to catch those species, would figure out a way to catch them. They're pretty good at figuring that out. But what happens if they catch those species and they don't have a market for those species, or the seafood dealers who handle them and normally process them don't have the right equipment to process them, or don't or needs, don't have the manpower or labor to process or handle those species and stuff like that. And so our roadmap for climate resilience started with a research project where we interviewed seafood businesses all around New England about if we see shifting a species, and particularly we focused on what we deemed climate winner species, but species that were predicted to either increase in abundance in the New England region or shift into the New England region. would they incorporate those into their business models, and what would they need to incorporate those into their business models? And so we interviewed all these seafood businesses and collected data and information from them about kind of whether or not they'd incorporate these climate winter species into their business, why or why not, and what would be important for them. And then we hosted a series of workshops, and this is where the roadmap comes in to talk about, the issues that the seafood businesses were facing and what would be helpful for them, so that we could then share that out and we're still working on this, but it's like an ongoing kind of project, but to then be able to share that out with, policymakers, decision makers, the seafood industry themselves, and provide them with kind of one of the things we found really helpful was just networking opportunities for them. A lot of times, if they sell to each other, then they have conversations about, day-to-day sales type information, but they don't a lot of times have opportunities to learn from each other, kind of in terms of, okay, like, I want to start dealing with triggerfish or something like that in this region, and every time I go to fillet it, my knife gets super dull because they have a really tough skin. How are you handling that? And stuff like that. And so opportunities for them to actually engage with each other, and kind of learn the tricks of the trade, so to speak, to actually, handle some of these species or whatever it has, is something that we've found to be helpful.
Awesome. And so take me through where the roadmap is today.
So we hosted a series of workshops, and we just published a paper in the American Fisheries Society Journal that is out now, but we're still working on kind of fully producing the guide. We're looking at kind of more funding opportunities to continuing host these workshops, collect more information, also provide these opportunities for the industry to kind of learn from each other. And then we'll develop kind of a white paper or guide of some kind that can then be used as that resource, as well as the full kind of website page that will be kind of a little bit more interactive to share that information out with the seafood industry.
And how has it been accepted so far with the community?
I think we've tried to focus primarily on what, kind of like opportunity species within our region. So obviously there's some species that with climate change are not going to be doing as well. And that's kind of just par for the course at the moment. But we've really tried to focus on species that are predicted to increase or shift into our area and potentially could be opportunities for seafood businesses. And so I think that so far they've been very interested to learn more, and see if that's something that would work for them as a business. Obviously, not every species is going to work for every seafood business in terms of incorporating it. For example, like if a business is primarily focused on shellfish or something like that, they might not be interested in incorporating black sea bass into their business because they don't deal with finfish. But I think that or there's some businesses just based on scale that they need species that reach a certain volume in order for it to kind of work for their businesses. But at the same time, we've seen a lot of businesses who are really interested in specifically helping the fishermen in the seafood industry. And so they see it as their roles to find markets for all these different products once the fishermen are allowed to harvest them. And so they see it as kind of an exciting challenge and are willing and eager to kind of learn more and see how they can help.
So to me, this feels like a reasonable approach to the whole shifting stocks question, that, whatever is driving it, the stocks of fish are moving, at least on the Atlantic side, up the coast,
Right.
coming from the southern part of the Atlantic up into the northern Atlantic. And I forget what the numbers were in the Gulf of Maine, but the temperature of the Gulf of Maine has gone up, right? And which is
Yeah,
going
dramatically.
to extirpate some colder water fish and introduce other fish. It's there's um, an element to this of sort of eating what is coming, as opposed to bemoaning the fact that what is leaving. And I, again, I don't want to appear like I don't care that fish are in trouble, that we
Right.
do. But the reality is that, cobia may be moving up into or regions or waters that were not traditionally where you would find cobia, or something like that.
Mhm.
And so to me, this feels like a responsible approach to dealing with that shifting stocks issue, as opposed to just, bemoaning the fact that it's happening.
Right, and that's not to say that we shouldn't address some of the, the things
No,
that are, like,
absolutely.
causing these shifts or that kind of stuff. Like, obviously the climate change is a big issue for a number of different reasons and all of that. But I think like trying to understand kind of, okay, well, like if they're going to be shifting kind of and are shifting already, what does the supply chain need to be successful in this like, realm and be able to continue to kind of help the fishermen have markets for their products and stuff. I think is something that is really important. And in some cases it's investment in infrastructure, for example. In other cases they need, more training for staff to have, uh, trained labor to actually like
Process of
handle
fish.
some of these different
Right.
species. In other cases they just, it maybe they need more distribution because the markets are still down south or something like that, so they need to be able to transport the fish back to where people, or maybe there's education that's needed for consumers and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different things I think that potentially could help.
So
But
have the larger grocery chains and even some of the local grocery chains begun to understand some of the work you're doing, and um, begin to see the value in carrying local fish?
I would say it's a case by case basis. I think that typically larger grocery chains are some of the slowest to change, just because there's a lot that goes. I mean, if you think about a grocery chain that's supplying, millions of pounds of fish across the country or
Right.
whatever, like there's a lot of people involved in those decision making in terms of purchasing. There's a lot that goes. They have yeah, just a lot that goes into making those changes. Whereas an independent, for example, small seafood retailer, like the owner can just make that decision and be like, okay, I'm going
Right.
to purchase this instead, and they can have it tomorrow if that's what they wanted. Whereas, like on a, big grocery scale chain, that's not always the case. Sometimes there's a lot more steps in that process to make that change. But we definitely see some grocery store chains carrying more local seafood. For example, there's a grocery store here in Rhode Island called Dave's Marketplace that they carry a ton of different local foods in general, but seafood's one of them. They always have a great selection of seafood at their seafood counter, and their seafood buyer does a really great job purchasing, from the boats down in Point Judith, etc. And so I think that you see that in some grocery chains, not all of them, I would say, but I think grocery chains in general are increasingly interested in sustainability, but local, not necessarily always. So a lot of them have sustainability criteria, and they'll follow things like the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch or Marine Stewardship Council, like Blue Fish Check type of thing in terms of seafood sustainability. And those are focused on it on a global scale, but not necessarily focused on a local scale. And so like we consider ourselves like place-based seafood, focused on things like in a local ecosystem. We want sustainability within the ecosystem, but also within the community kind of. And I would say a lot of times the bigger chains are more focused on just overall sustainability, maybe within the global thing, but are not necessarily as local community focused.
Sure. And of course, a Kroger is going to have a very different set of challenges than Dave's is going to. It made me laugh when you said Dave's, because I remember when we had coffee, I was asking about, oh, so who's a good local fishmonger, and you said, "Oh, you should try Dave's." And I remember we went, and that became our go-to while we were up there on a regular basis. So it's I'm gonna we're getting close to the hour, so I'm gonna try to wrap up a little bit. A couple of questions. So it's National Seafood Month, and so I'm thinking in the culinary space. Um, Talk a little bit about for chefs and restaurateurs who may be interested in this space but not like haven't gone there yet. How do they get in touch with you? How do they what can you offer them to say, hey, you want to start thinking about incorporating this into your menu?
I'm happy to talk to kind of, any local chefs or restaurants kind of within our region. And they can just get in touch with me via email. My email is kate@eatingwiththeecosystem.org. And I'm happy to have a conversation with them kind of about their restaurant and the local seafood that we have here. But I think, overall, I mean, our website also, there's a contact us page, and that email goes directly to me if they have a hard time with that.
But Kate, do you feel like what you've learned, how many years has it now been you've been here?
I've been eating with Ecosystem for almost 8 years, which
Yeah.
seems crazy.
Yeah. So in 8 years, I mean, do you feel like if somebody in Seattle, Washington, or Portland, Oregon, or Austin, well, I shouldn't say Austin, Galveston, Texas said, "Hey, how do you guys do this?" Do you feel like you could translate a lot of the fundamentals to other regions?
Yeah, I think a lot of the principles and like the methods that we're using kind of at Eating with the Ecosystem could definitely be translated to other regions. I don't have as many on the ground connections in other regions. And so I think one of the things that I do here kind of here in New England is a lot of bridge building, connection building, kind of whatever between, for example, the fishermen and the seafood businesses and the restaurants that want to use those seafood or the retail markets and different spaces like that. And so I think that would be harder for me to do kind of in Seattle for where I've never actually been.
Right.
But yeah, I think the ideas behind it and the type of work that we're doing and the principles behind a place-based seafood is something that could be applied anywhere.
So our listeners, our viewers, if they said, "Hey, I'm fascinated by this," so it definitely translates the work you're doing, even though you may not have been, in Seattle to
Right.
be there, or New Orleans. I mean, we've had a couple of chefs from New Orleans on the show, and it's this is a personal interest to me just because I love seafood, grew up in New England, and it's but I think you've taken a very creative approach to dealing with some of the challenges in the seafood market. And I would encourage our listeners and viewers who see the same kind of concerns or opportunities to get in touch with Kate because you're doing terrific work. All right, I'm
Thank
going
you.
to close out with two simple questions.
Okay.
All right. But these are sort of the fun. We end our monthly updates with a seafood recipe. So, Kate, what's your favorite seafood recipe?
Ooh, so my favorite seafood to eat just in
Okay.
general, like my favorite food is lobster, and I love
Okay.
it just like steamed, ideally in salt water,
Oh,
like from the beach or whatever. And just steamed, dipped in butter, like very simple. That's probably my like go-to favorite. But I feel like I think something I make at home a lot more frequently because I'm not eating lobster every day of the week,
right.
is I love just like a pan-seared piece of fish. Like for example, tautog is in season right now here in Rhode Island, or like black sea bass. This is great with fluke, anything. Um, but pan-seared piece of fish with like a beurre blanc sauce, and then some like roasted veggies or things like that. The beurre blanc sauce goes well over anything.
Right.
It's basically like a butter sauce. So,
Right.
and so I feel like that over any kind of fish, some roasted veggies, anything like that is something that's pretty easy actually to make at home, and always tastes delicious. So I love that.
Simple, easy to prepare, hot skillet, little
And
wine, a
it's
little
really
butter.
versatile. You can use whatever local fish that you have,
Yeah.
and you can use kind of whatever veggies that you want to pair that night. Anything tastes great with butter over it. So
Yeah, for sure.
um,
Yeah. Okay. I'm a visitor to Rhode Island.
all right.
Where are you going to tell me to go for a fabulous seafood dinner?
Ooh. I mean, we have so many great
I know.
options, and I have a lot of favorites, but I definitely I love Dune Brothers seafood. They're going to be on the more casual side. It's kind of like a seafood shack. They just opened a second location in Providence, but they have a great variety of different local seafood. They're constantly kind of like rotating what species are on the menu based on what the fishermen are catching. And they have just, yeah, amazing casual style kind of food, but really delicious. And things like a dogfish sandwich that's so good, or like these fried whole whiting, or they'll do different grilled whole fish and stuff. Just everything they have there is so good.
And what's the name of the place again?
Dune Brothers Seafood.
Spell it.
Dune, and then Brothers.
Dune, okay.
Like the dune, like a beach. Yeah, Dune Brothers. They're great. Highly recommend them.
Providence.
They're in Providence. Yep.
Okay.
But I mean, we have so many other great places. We worked with Sky Kim, who's the chef at Gift Horse in Providence. This summer, she was part of our Fishes of the Fort team of chefs that. She's amazing. It's a great oyster bar / crudo kind of place. And then their sister restaurant, Oberlin, has some amazing great fish. And Ben Sukel's the chef there. Love that place. Matunic Oyster Bar down in Matunic is always great for, oysters, local seafood, and great views also. Nick's on Broadway in Providence is amazing. Derek's awesome. There's just so many great places. I have to definitely Mystic is right over the border. And Shipwright's Daughter is one of my favorite places. David Sandridge is one of our board members, but he's the chef there and just won Best Chef in the Northeast James Beard Award. And he's super into seafood and sustainability and serves things like slipper limpets and sea robins and whiting and all kinds of fun stuff on his menu. So all kinds of amazing places, I feel like. But
I can tell you what's going to be the most popular part of this broadcast is going to be this last 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Kate, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Can they still get copies of Simmering the Sea?
So we've got a few copies left. We are actually almost out, which is crazy.
Well, you better get them soon then, folks.
Yeah, there's a few copies left, but not too many.
Okay. Well, I heartily recommend it. And again, Kate, I want to thank you. The work you're doing is terrific. It's personally inspiring to me, but I know that it's making a huge difference and can make a huge difference in the future. So kudos to you all. And thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Tom. It's been fun.
All right. Well, I hope we can get you back for another chat. We'll be having another chat in November and maybe even one more in December. But again, just many thanks for the work you're doing, and thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of Waterside Chat, share it with your friends and colleagues. You can check us out on YouTube or most podcast services. To stay up to date on Waterside Chats and the Marine Fish Conservation Network, sign up for emails at conservefish.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you at the next Waterside Chat.